This is Jim Horn with our continuing Black and White Photography Master Series. Today we have with us Andrew Hoff, and we're going to show some great street photography. Andrew Hoff began his journey in photography during college, initially finding the experience unsatisfying while sharing a 35 millimeter Konica camera and working in a darkroom. His passion reignited when he received a Canon AE1 as a graduation gift, leading him to join the Harrisburg Camera Club in 1986. Over 36 years, he evolved from film to digital photography, exploring genres from landscapes to abstracts and ultimately building a documentary portfolio on carnival workers. His current work has taken him to fairs from Maine to Texas. An experienced educator, Andrew offers educational programs and critiques for photographers at all levels. His work has earned him a place in numerous exhibitions and is a permanent part of the Pennsylvania State Museum and the Susquehanna Art Museum. Holding a degree in communications journalism, Andrew resides in York County, Pennsylvania, and has made significant contributions as a past president of the Harrisburg Camera Club, including steering its transition from film to digital photography. As I said in the intro, I've got with me Mr. Andrew Hoff. I think you guys are going to really see some great photography here. And it's a genre, like I said in the introduction, that I love. Spent a lot of time doing it myself. Street photography. And Andrew has focused on a particular type of street photography. And I think it's you guys are going to really enjoy the images. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Jim?
Good. Andrew is in Pennsylvania, the great state of Pennsylvania. You had a vote today, huh? A little bit of people were out. At least that's what I saw in the news. That may not be the case, but I saw that it was a day of voting. But more primarily is we've got some great images here. We really haven't had much street photography on the channel, and having Andrew on is going to be quite the experience. So, Andrew, why don't we start and take a look at some of these photographs? Okay. And you can explain them to us, explain what you're doing, and so forth and so on. There we go.
All right. About 5 years ago, I was invited to join somebody, mainly so she could have me drive, because she doesn't like to drive at night, to go photograph the Berks County Carnival. I said, okay, I'll go. I'll take my camera. And, I took my camera, took some pictures, wasn't really into it too much. And then through the time, I kept seeing her work and seeing how good it was. I said, well, I can do that too. So I started upping my game up, and I started really concentrating on giving it full attention. So we'll start with this photo.
Go ahead.
This is a very important photo because this brought through to me the joy of doing this kind of work. When I originally photographed, I only saw two people in it. I brought it back. I opened it up, I started working on it, and then I realized there was a third person in it in the center, and I never saw them. So this really brought something to mind and said, I'm photographing stuff I don't see. What else am I missing? I need to keep doing this so I can see the people in it. So when I went back and did my Photoshop on it, I particularly made the hidden face the brightest. The male's faces generally always make the darkest, and there's a third tone range, which would be the working the booth. I gave her the mid range. So I have three different skin tone levels, so your eye moves around in the photograph.
I find that the way that you've shot this in the umbrella is phenomenal. It's almost like a light umbrella, you like use in studio photography. it just draws you right there, doesn't it?
Yes. Sometimes you get very lucky when I do this, and sometimes I feel it's back in my mind. I know what I'm doing, but I don't see it. But I do see it subconsciously, and then I find it when I go back into through the images again.
Yeah, and I think that's how a lot of especially street photography, because it's normally pretty fast. You shoot pretty quick, and you see an image, and then, as you said earlier, when you went back to look at the image, there was this gruff character in here that it does draw your eye. I mean, it's almost like I go from her face down almost as a diagonal right down to his headshot. I think it's interesting, and for the equipment geeks that we have that listen to the channel, what kind of camera do you typically shoot with?
I was originally shooting with the Canon 7D, but I wasn't happy with the quality of the images. And Karen was shooting with Karen, my friend who was photographing me with him, was shooting with an XT1 at the time. So at the time, I switched all my equipment out from Canon to Fuji because I could shoot at really high ISOs, like 3200, and I was getting very sharp images, which I wasn't getting with the Canon. Now, I did save one or two pieces of Canon equipment for odds and ends stuff I like it for. But for most of the street stuff, I'm now shooting with the Fuji XH1 or an XT2. The XH1 takes the bulk of it because it's image stabilized. So I can get 5 stops of image stabilization on top of everything. And it's generally shot about 3200 and at f4. It depends how dark it is. The darker it gets, obviously, I got to go with the shorter f-stop.
So what lens do you typically use for your street photography?
A 16 to 80 or 18 to 55.
Okay, super. So you really cover the range there when you need to. And in street photography, thinking about that, you really have to, sometimes you're too far away, sometimes you're too close. That really gives you a nice zoom. The ability to zoom is important. Okay. Aha, I've seen something like this. One thing I have to ask, Andrew, before I've been out and we have a carnival here in Traverse City, Michigan that comes every year, and I've gone out to do a little bit of shooting. Certainly not as good as you've got here, and certainly not as extensive. Do you have problems with the carnival people not wanting their photograph taken? Oh, you're laughing.
Yeah, I can generally gauge when they don't want to take in, because sometimes they'll put their sunglasses on, sometimes they'll put their hat down lower, sometimes they'll literally turn their back to me and walk away. That's generally a hint. There's really only been one time where I asked somebody, because I wanted to shoot them very, very tight and very close. And I asked him, and I could tell he was skittish already. I asked him, "Do you mind if I take your photo?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And I walked away. But generally, I get dirty looks, but that's kind of how I like it too, because that gives a raw edge to the photographs. I don't like telling people I'm photographing, because then that makes them lighten up and it changes their whole persona. So I just kind of sniper them, so to speak.
Yeah, and carnival people are a little edgy to begin with. I think that might be a good terminology. And who knows what their background is and where they're
Yes.
from and what they've done. So photographs. Let's talk about this photograph. Here you've got this gal sitting on obviously her booth, and then the animals.
Yeah, this one, I really enjoyed this one a lot. It's done well in shows, but I have done a lot of manipulation to it, and I'm not afraid to do that with these photographs, because I want you to see their faces, because their faces are the most important part. So what I did was, any background around her head, I've eliminated, I cloned out the least amount I had to. And then at her feet, I opened up and lightened up the fan on the bottom of her feet when and darkened up the blacks and lightened up the whites, so you could see her feet and how it gives her a podium to stand on, and then you go up to her face. And as with all these people in the carnivals, I lighten their faces because that's the most important part. So as their faces are lighter, your eye tends to go to them.
Yeah, that's for sure, because you've done a good job on the background here. You've eliminated that distraction, whatever was back there. And as I was looking at the photograph and sort of studying it before, I like the fact that she's sitting somewhat in the same position as those teddy bears that are right on top of her, or above her. It's a great shot. Okay.
I followed her around, and this year I only have one photo of her, and she's laughing hysterically, which goes opposite to all the other photos. So I don't know if I'll be able to use that, but it's just an interesting look. I mean, her mouth is so open, it almost looks like a face, but it's such a different photograph from this.
Yeah. Okay. A t-shirt guy. I have to tell you, he looks a little bit down and out, and I think you've captured that. And once again, you work the background. Why don't you talk about this?
Well, this man I've also photographed for 3 years in a row. The first year I saw him, he was much younger looking, and I photographed him with his balloons in the background, and he was sitting, and he just had a dejected look. This was taken 2 years ago, and I saw him. I hardly recognized him because he had changed so much in his physique and his facial features. And I like the fact that he just stared at me and gave me that look. This gives me that kind of Diane Arbus type look that I wanted to see in it. And what I try to do with the photos I want people to not see pretty photos, oddly enough. I want them to see a photograph that's going to sear into their memory. I want them to understand that these people are living a different life from them, and it's not pretty. So I want to capture that and have people start realizing that not everything's so pretty on the other side of the game.
Well, with this photograph, you and some of the others that are going to follow, I think you get you feel this. There's something going on in this guy's life. I don't know what it is, but and once again, you've lightened his face. That's where my eye went when I first looked at the photograph. That's really, and the backdrop is very appropriate. I mean, he's got his I'm assuming those are T-shirts, so it's interesting.
Yeah, this time he was facing a completely different direction. I had seen a face before, so I was lucky enough to get it. A lot of times I consider myself lucky to get these because these are once-in-a-moment images. They may never pose like this again for another 10, 12 days. They may never pose like this again. I may never get that look again. So this is why I like doing this photography, because unlike landscape where you just wait for the light, here you always find something different, and you're really capturing just a segment of their life. And that's important to me.
That moment in time. There's this. I love this. I really do. I think you captured this at absolutely the right moment. Let's talk about it.
Well, this one took a long time to take. I had to wait for the people to move out of her way. I had to wait till she got in the right position. So I must have spent 15 minutes just sitting on the ground, just waiting for that one moment, and everybody's walking around me. So I got it. I took several. This was the best one, obviously. But what I reminded me of a Bresson photograph.
Yes.
So that's why I started seeing that even before I took the picture. So when I got done and put it together, I went through every one of those little holes in her mouthpiece that's covering her eye and opened up her eye in each individual hole with Photoshop. So her eye actually penetrated through the metal so you could clearly see it.
Yeah, it is. Anybody familiar with Bresson's work would agree this absolutely falls right in that category. It is. And for those viewers just on the podcast, I'd suggest you come on over to the YouTube channel and take a look at these photographs as Andrew and I go through them. But this is a great shot.
I cropped that one really severely too.
Yeah,
I had it originally.
Go ahead, Andrew. I'm sorry.
I originally had it with shoulders in it, and I've cropped it really hard just to see her face.
And you know the interesting thing, and I think that's the sign of a very good street photographer, is most people don't realize that a lot of times you have to sit there and wait for the shot you see it, if it, in your mind's eye, you know what you want, but you have to sit there as you did for 15 minutes to get the shot.
Right. I've learned a lot of patience. Some days I go in there and shoot real quick, and some days I have to sit. That's all there is to it. Some fairs I get good results. Some fairs I get no results. It all depends on the people, and really depends on the personalities of the people I'm photographing. If they have no personality, it doesn't do any good to photograph them.
That's very true. Let's talk about, this is another window shot, but it's really framed in a very unique way. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. I hate to use the term lucky, but I was fortunate maybe that they had just changed people that were selling the tickets. And he stepped in, and there was nobody at the window, and he just happened to be looking at me at the time. And the important thing from here is the hands and the quality of the mustache and the eyes. And the fact that I like that frame just barely covers his eyes, and it just hoods them over. So what I've done in this one is I've actually taken the veins in his hands and darkened them up to give more detail to him. And I've gone in and opened up the white of his eyes and actually toned down his mustache a little bit so I could get more detail in the whiskers. I really do spend a lot of time manipulating them, but it's all for the good. I don't want to manipulate them to being the point of comical. That's just work.
Yeah, and looking at you folks, I don't have a big photograph on the screen. If you're on YouTube, you can enlarge it, but he's done a phenomenal job at getting the veins and having the veins show through, and it just makes it even look more realistic rather than just a plain hand there that is just sort of white. Very interesting shot. And Andrew, what I've noticed on these as I've gone through them before, you have a good compositional, you use a very good compositional technique of framing the subjects. I mean, on this one here, it's a perfect frame as the ones prior. Go ahead.
This one I really like because excuse me. The gentleman shirt is so disheveled, and the background is actually moving. So I blurred the back. I get the background blur, and that's a bonus. But again, I have the framing with the railings around him. He's not looking at me, oddly enough. He's looking away, which is sometimes unusual with some of my photographs. But what I've learned from doing this portfolio is that you need wide photographs, medium range photographs, and very tight photographs to make it interesting. I learned that up in New York City when a gentleman was doing my portfolio. He goes, I appreciate the fact that you have very wide, medium shots and very tight shots to break up the portfolio so it doesn't look boring. And this is one of those medium range shots.
Yeah, it's and you can see the blur in the background. Once again, you've got the detail in the face. You can see the sort of the the chin where it sort of has got a few layers to it, and and it's great. Okay. Yes. Okay. Why don't you talk about this? Is an interesting one. You've got these two gals. This is the old basketball hoop shot.
Right.
Let's talk about your making of this photograph.
I can tell you I went to this fair and only spent 45 minutes there and came out with this photograph and another stunning photograph out of it. I was so happy to get. So, like I said, sometimes I can go for 45 minutes and get two dynamic images. One fair I went to 2 days in a row and got nothing. So it happens and sometimes it doesn't happen. But when I go to the fair, if I get one image, I'm really happy. Because if I go to 15 fairs, I got 15 really super images for 1 year. And I start piling them up. Then I have, 30, 40. So this image, I did spend a lot of time on. I had to straighten it out first. But again, we go back to that Diane Arbus look with the poses. If these women aren't posed in this fashion, it falls apart. And
Yeah,
the one with you can tell the heat's bothering the older woman. The other one is posing, but I don't know why. It's just a very bizarre pose for being in that kind of a booth. So what I had to do with this is since both women are on the same plane of sight, I had to actually manipulate their shirts. The girl on the left, I darkened her shirt, and the woman on the right, I lightened her shirt so I could differentiate the two of them so they didn't look like one person. And I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but if I don't have a density of light shift between their clothing, they look like they're one person. It's like architectural photography. If you get two things on the same plane, you like that because they look the same. There's symmetry, but here I really don't want the symmetry. I want them to be alone but together. So they're two subjects, but I want them to have I hate to say equal weight because that's a killer, but I want them to have a different weight, even though they're literally on the same height level too, if you look at it.
yeah.
So I had to do a lot of straightening out. I had to fill in grass at the bottom because of straightening it out, and I had to get rid of some other stuff on the side that was essentially garbage. So I do a lot of cleanup on these because, again, I want you to concentrate on the faces. That's where the key is. It's not on the stuff around it. Anything that has a highlight in it is automatically gone. I turn down every highlight. When I get the boosts that have the balloons in them, I take all the glare off every balloon because all it does is take your eye away from the subject. So here I've lightened the girl up more than the woman. I darkened her down. So now I've got a woman with the darker complexion, a lighter shirt, and a girl with a lighter complexion, a darker shirt, just to give your eyes something to work with.
And it does. And you've got the background. It's almost like 3D. They stand out very well in the composition. And, as I'm looking around this thing again, folks, once again, get on the YouTube channel. If you're on the podcast, you got to take a look at these. Those are great images, Andrew. And I'm very serious about it. As I said, I've tried to do the carnival thing. I never followed through on it. Maybe you've given me some incentive to chase some of the carnival characters that we have here occasionally. But you practiced this. You've made it a fine art form, to say the least.
I am starting to follow these people. There's certain people I see all the time or consistently, and I'm trying to also work a portfolio of how their changes and how their body language changes from year to year. So I'm working on that plane also, just not the carnivals. And I'm trying to get enough really stellar images to get a book together. I
I
have
think
enough for
that
an exhibition, but the book is the real key.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because to get your work out like that, I think a book would be really appropriate. The other thing I was going to ask you quickly is we talked a little bit over the phone about your post processing, And I mean, everybody thinks you have to have the latest edition of Photoshop, and you have to have, but not you. What
No.
is your briefly? What is your technique when you bring the image in?
Well, I have Lightroom 3 and Photoshop 8 because
Okay,
I've got them mastered, and I really wasn't happy when I saw the updates on the Photoshop, and it started getting too complicated. So I essentially just lately I just been bringing in with Photoshop, convert it to black and white, and then go through with my midtones, and then start wiping out all the highlights and all the backgrounds, and do a little vignetting, and open up the faces and open up the eyes. Yeah, I got to have the eyes open too, so I'll go in there and whiten the whites of the eyes. I mean, I'll intentionally do that because then you get to look at them,
right.
and then your eye goes right to the face, and that's really the key. The
Yeah, that
other thing I'll say about the carnivals are not everything looks good in black and white. There's a lot of stuff that actually looks good in color and doesn't convert well into black and white. But I'd say generally about 75% of the photographs work in black and white. And there's a 25% that just plain doesn't.
Yeah, Carnival, when you think about it, is pretty colorful. Flashing lights and all that other stuff that goes on. And you're right. A lot of things don't convert to black and white. You have tonal mergers and they just don't work. And
Right.
it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of problems. Well, Andrew, I thank you very much for coming
Oh,
on the
no problem.
program.
Thank you.
And it's really been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure looking at some great photographs. I wish you a lot of luck with the book idea because I certainly think it's really appropriate for this kind of work. And I'll bet you'll even sell a few copies or two, you know?
That would be great. The starving artists need to sell stuff.
There you go. Okay, Andrew, you take care. Have yourself a great evening.
All right. Thank you very much, Jen, and good night.